When you walk into a field and see a crop that's just not right, your job description kind of changes. You're not just a farmer anymore, you're a detective. Seriously. The health of those plants and your bottom line really boils down to one thing. Can you read the clues, identify the suspect, and crack the case? It's called plant diagnostics, and honestly, it's one of the most important skills you can have out there. And that brings us to the central mystery, right? A plant can't just come out and tell you what's wrong with it. So all those symptoms, yellow leaves, weird spots, stunted growth, it's like a language, and we have to learn how to speak it. Is the culprit a living thing, something we call a biotic stressor? Or is it something in the environment, an abiotic stressor? Think nutrient problems, chemical sprays, or just bad weather. Figuring out how to tell those two apart, well, that's the whole game. So, rule number 1 of any field investigation: you have to fight that urge to just stare at a single sick leaf. The first thing you've got to do is zoom out. Look at the big picture. How is the problem spread across the entire field? This wide-angle view is going to give you your first and maybe your most important set of clues. And what's so cool is how these simple patterns can tell such a big story. Are the symptoms popping up in patches and clusters? Well, that tells you to look down. Your investigation should probably start with the soil. We're talking nematodes, fungus, maybe a weird nutrient spot. But what if the damage is totally uniform, just everywhere? That points to a single big event. Maybe rust spores blew in on the wind, or herbicide drifted over, or a sudden frost hit every single plant. Just by looking at the pattern, you've already cut your list of suspects in half.
Okay, so once we've surveyed the scene of the crime, it's time to build our list of suspects. Let's start with the biotic culprits. These are the living organisms that are eating, infecting, or just plain out competing our crops. Let's get to know the usual lineup: insects, mites, and weeds.
Let's take a maize crop, for instance. You've got a whole cast of potential villains here. You've got your sapsuckers, like tiny aphids, that are literally sucking the life right out of the plant. Then you've got the vectors, like the leafhopper. It doesn't just feed, it carries and spreads nasty diseases like maize streak. And of course, there are the chewers, like the African bollworm, whose larvae just munch right through the most important parts of the plant. You've got to know their MO to catch them. Now let's get one thing straight, because this is a big one. Mites are not insects. They're arachnids, so they're actually more like tiny spiders, and that's a huge distinction. They're often microscopic, so they're super easy to miss, and the infamous red spider mite, it absolutely loves hot, dry weather, which of course is when the plant is already stressed out. Talk about a perfect storm. So how do you catch a culprit you can barely even see? You've got to look for their calling card. Mites use these little piercing mouth parts to suck the juice out of individual plant cells. And what that leaves behind is this unique stippled or speckled look on the leaves. If it gets really bad, you'll see the leaves turn yellow and maybe even find their delicate little webs on the underside. Your hand lens is your best friend here. It's the detective's magnifying glass. And our last living suspect is the good old weed. It's the ultimate competitor for light, water, and nutrients. Now, the first thing you need to do with weeds is split them into 2 main camps: monocots and dicots. Just think grasses versus broadleaf plants. And listen, this isn't just some boring botany lesson. It's mission critical. Their basic biology, like where their growth points are, will tell you exactly which control methods, and especially which herbicides, are actually going to work on them. All right, and now for the plot twist. Sometimes you can search that field high and low. You look for bugs, you look for mites, you look for signs of disease, and you find absolutely nothing. Why? Because your culprit isn't even alive. This is abiotic stress, damage from the environment, and it creates symptoms that are dead ringers for pest damage. These are the lookalikes, the imposters that can send your whole investigation off track. And the list of these non-living bad guys is pretty long. You've got strong winds that can shred leaves or just knock the whole crop over. A late frost can zap all the new growth. Too much water, not enough water, both create obvious stress. Nutrient problems can paint the leaves all sorts of crazy colors. And yeah, ironically, sometimes the very chemicals we use to help the crop can end up hurting it. Any one of these can fool you into thinking you've got a disease on your hands. This right here, this is where a great field detective really shows their stuff. Cracking these cases is all about learning to spot the tiny differences between those look-alike symptoms. It takes a sharp eye, for sure, and a real understanding of how plants show us they're in trouble. So let's dive into a few classic case files. Okay, case file number 1. You see purplish leaves on a soybean plant. Your brain might immediately jump to phosphorus deficiency, a classic cause of that purplish color. But hold on, look closer.
Is the purple color just kind of all over, or is it specifically on the veins on the underside of the leaf? If it's the veins, bingo, that is the telltale sign of an herbicide injury. The specific location of the symptom is the clue that cracks the case. Case file number 2, yellowing maize. So is the plant hungry or is it drowning? With a nitrogen deficiency, you'll see a very specific yellow V shape that starts at the tip of the older, lower leaves and works its way down the middle. But if the entire plant is just kind of stunted and generally yellow, you might want to check your soil moisture. If the roots are waterlogged, they can't get oxygen, and the whole system starts to shut down. Again, it's all about the pattern.
And this last case really drives the point home. Again, we've got yellowing maize. Now, a fungal disease is usually going to leave behind some evidence, like distinct spots or rings inside that yellow area. But an injury from an herbicide like atrazine, it can cause what's called vinyl chlorosis, where the veins themselves turn yellow, but the tissue in between stays green. It's a really specific signature that once you've seen it, you won't forget.
Think about it. No detective would ever close a case based on just one piece of evidence, and you shouldn't either. A really solid diagnosis comes from building a complete case history. You take what you see with your eyes and combine it with every other bit of information you can get your hands on.
The pros follow a pretty simple 4-step process. First, describe the symptoms and be specific. Second, build case history. What has the weather been like? What's been sprayed? What's the soil type? Third, get down on your hands and knees with that hand lens and actually look for the bad guys. And finally, step 4, when in doubt, send it to the lab. A soil or tissue analysis is like getting forensic proof. And let's just hang on this for a second, because this is the golden rule. Your eyes are your #1 tool, no doubt about it. But they can be tricked. A visual diagnosis is a great place to start. It's your working theory. But for a final, confirmed verdict, especially when your money is on the line, you really want to back it up with hard data. So, why does all this detective work really matter? Well, because if you get the diagnosis wrong, you're going to get the treatment wrong. It's that simple. Getting it right saves you from wasting money on products you don't need, it protects the environment, and ultimately, it saves the very crop you've worked all season to grow. This is the absolute bedrock of smart farming. So the next time you walk past a field or even just look at the plants in your own backyard, you've got a new set of eyes. You have the basic tools of a field detective. The plants out there, they're always talking, always telling a story with the clues and patterns they show us. The only real question is, are we paying close enough attention to read it?